Hi again, everyone. Today, we have a story about God's power and might. And after the story, I will ask you a few questions about the story. You ready? The story goes like this. After wandering in the desert for 40 years, God's people, the Israelites, finally was close to reaching the land that God promised to them. Remember, God promised His own people will take the promised land since the time of Abraham, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. God never breaks His promises. Now, at this point in our story, a few hundred years later, God's people was about to take the promised land. Remember, at this point, the great leader Moses had already died, and God told Joshua everyone will see him as leader that very day. Now, there was only one big river to cross, and the Israelites would finally be in the land that God had promised them. Sometimes people call the land of milk and honey. But the Jordan River, the river that they're going to cross, was at its most full. The water of Jordan River at this time was very, very hard to cross. The people could look across the river and see the beautiful land of Canaan with its green grass and its tall trees and its fields of golden grain, but they could not cross the river because the river was too deep and too fast. The Lord told Joshua His special plan. He told Joshua to gather the priests together and have them carry the Ark of the Covenant and walk straight into the Jordan River. The people were to follow them. This must have seemed really scary for everyone, but they obeyed God. They remembered how He had always taken care of them at the Red Sea. He would take care of them that day as well. The priests picked up the big gold box, the Ark of the Covenant, where the 10 Commandments of God is in, and they started walking toward the water. The priests walked into the river first. The water was fast and looked very dangerous, but they just kept walking. Then an amazing thing happened. As soon as the priests' feet touched the water, God made the water stop flowing. The river dried up wherever the priests walked. It was just like when the Red Sea parted for Moses. He took the ark and carried it to the middle of the Jordan River and then stopped. While the priests stood with the ark, all of the people passed through to the other side. They didn't even get wet. God wanted the people to always remember how He stopped the Jordan River. He told Joshua to choose 12 men to gather one large stone each. The men carried the 12 stones over to their camp beside the river and put them into a large pile. The Lord told the people that from now on, when anyone saw the pile of 12 stones, they would remember the special day that the Lord helped them cross the Jordan River into the promised land. After everyone was finished crossing the river, the priests came up out of the river. As soon as their feet touched the ground next to the dried river, then the water all rushed back and the river began to flow with water again. The water was just as deep and fast as it had been before. The Israelites made camp where they had put their 12 stones. As everyone looked at the stones, they must have thanked God and remembered about what He had done for them. So, God's power was shown to all of Israel on that day. God's promise for the promised land was still being kept by God. And on that day, everyone saw Joshua as their leader. When the enemies of God's people heard that God had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel, the enemies of God's people became very scared. That was the story. Now, some questions to see if you've been listening. First question. Are you ready? Who went into the Jordan River first? What was that? You said the priests? Good. Okay, so now, second question. What happens when the priests got to the edge of the river? The river dried up. Correct. What did the people do after they crossed the river? What did the people do after they crossed the river? They put 12 stones together so they can remember God's power. Now, what was the promise that God kept for a few hundred years? God kept the promise that the Israelites will take the promised land. You see, God is a promise keeper, and He never breaks His promises. You know what else God promised to us? If we trust that Jesus Christ died, and we trust that Jesus Christ raised up again and that He is fully alive on the third day, and if we believe that Jesus is our leader and the one who rescues us from hell, we will be with God forever. And He will never break that promise. My question for you is, have you trusted in Jesus Christ yet?